funding to support Medicaid expansion as written. And John Green, putting your personal ideology aside, why would you propose a bill that directly contradicts the will of the people who voted 61% statewide to expand Medicaid to those families in Idaho that need health coverage the most? So we'll start and in work our way. You just want to pop up and say yay, nay, or?
I do not plan on voting for Medicaid expansion this year.
My District 3 told me not to vote for Medicaid expansion, and that also reflects my personal opinion. I think we're going down the wrong road. I think the first thing you do when you find yourself in a hole, which was created by the so-called Affordable Care Act, the first thing you do when you find yourself at the bottom of the hole is stop digging. We keep digging ourselves deeper and deeper into a hole until we get to the point where we cannot afford this system. It will take control of the whole healthcare system. Right now, Medicaid at the state level right now takes a bigger portion of our budget than the K through 12 education system. I don't know if many people know that. And to go to Medicaid expansion is just going to bankrupt us. And this is just not a good idea. We're finding more and more doctors that are refusing Medicare and Medicaid patients. We're already faced with a doctor shortage as well as a teacher shortage, but that's a different issue. We're going to force the state to create more positions for doctors, and this just becomes a circular argument to the point where we're going to basically kill the profession and just ruin our healthcare system.
Why don't you raise your constituents?
Oh, I want to tell you that our District 3 rejected Medicaid expansion. So this business of 41 or 61% of the state approving it, that does not apply to my district, and I have to support the will of the people in my district.
We're in the same district, so that goes for me as well. The whole idea of this initiative that came before the people, it's pretty frightening, really. I didn't realize till just recently that only 24 states do not have an initiative process. I thought that was kind of interesting because we've kind of grown up with that, but I thought, because what you do is you open the door for somebody with a lot of money to come in, and they're not required to tell the truth. And we in the legislature, we have no mechanism for funding ad campaign to say what the truth is. We do things and people react to it, and it kind of has to follow what it is. We can talk to people one-on-one and tell them what we think about it, but we can't really get out to the masses. And people, a billionaire can come into this state, just like Marcy's Law and different things, and they can change the whole dynamic of this state. That happened in Arizona this year. We all should be very concerned about that because a billionaire came in, put $21 million into this state races in Arizona, and kind of turned the state. That kind of explains why a senator was elected in that state that probably a lot of us would not have approved of had we been able to vote on that. Anyway, just one thing on Medicaid expansion. There was so much misinformation on that, but years ago, growing up in Kellogg, and you hear things like, we send our money to the federal government, and they keep it, we want our money back. And that was used in the Medicaid expansion thing. Everybody said, we send money to the federal government, we want our $360 million back. The fact is, for every dollar that Idaho sends to DC, we get roughly $1.30 back. People don't know that. Because of the federal lands issue, we do not have the revenue that a lot of other states do. So that plays really well. You tell people we want our money back. Well, yeah, I want my money back too. And without knowing the truth about that, a lot of people, I think, because I mention that to people, a lot of people when I say that we get more than we give, so that might have changed their vote on this Medicaid expansion thing. And there's so many reasons why it's bad. The House is doing some sideboards. We're trying to come up with things that will make it manageable. And there's the thing that if right now it's 90-10, which means, and nobody knows, there's not a person in the legislature down there that thinks it's just going to be $40 million for the state share. The numbers are fixed. I mean, everybody thinks it's going to be much higher because the numbers are growing, and every state there have been projections, and they've always been higher. So we expect that to be the case. But to say that if the federal government suddenly goes, they're going to pay 85%, we're going to pay 15%, then we'll abandon it. The problem is, once you initiate these programs, you never get rid of them. And so it's a dangerous road. I think at the end of the day, it's going to do more to destroy healthcare in this country than it'll ever do to help people. And we already have doctor shortage. There's so many reasons about it. I just hit the one primarily, but there's more people here to talk.
Ditto what Tony said, ditto from what Ron said. I thought Medicaid expansion was bad from the very get-go. And I don't know, I see a lot of people from District 3 here. I was asked what I thought about it, and I told them, they asked me, I was against it. But I said, don't believe me, there's gonna be information coming in from all sides. Do your due diligence. And you guys did, because of we came in like a third lowest in the state. So you guys did your due diligence in it and showed it. And also, the 90-10 split worries me. I used to work Department of Homeland Security and National Security matters, but our building was close to Health and Human Services. There was rumors way back when that there was a 90-10 split and it was going to be reduced. So it was a bad deal to begin with, and it still is a bad deal. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, my district, District 4, Coeur d'Alene, did pass it. And even though during the campaign I sent out information to try to explain to people why it was a concern, what the areas of impact were that I wasn't going to support, our district passed it, and I pledged that I would follow the will of my district. But that does not mean that I ever promised to never put any protections on it. It will not change Medicaid expansion. The protections that I have I am the first person to introduce a bill having to do with Medicaid expansion. It's Senate Bill 1100, and it simply adds a few protections and enhancements to Medicaid expansion. It does not have any restrictions on it. The 90-10 split in funding that you've been hearing about, the federal government will pay 90% for Medicaid expansion. The state will pick up 10%. But if that funding formula changes, what is called an escape clause, and they're used frequently in legislation, so it's standard language. I didn't make up the language. The Legislative Services just put it in there as standard. Says that the program will stop until but then it will be during a legislative session that it would stop, and the legislature would be in the process of evaluating the impact of whatever change in funding that is proposed by the federal government. And the federal government always gives they give a leeway of several months, if not a half of a year or so, before they change these kinds of programs. So we would have a chance to look at it and say, can we afford this or can we not? Is this going to ruin our education budget if we accept this? Is this going to change the way we can provide for those who are fully disabled? There are a lot of things we pay for in our state that are dependent on having a decently healthy budget that is balanced. And if one issue takes all of the funding or a great deal of the funding, we're in trouble, because we have a balanced budget amendment requirement in our state. We have to have a balanced budget at the end of the session. So that escape clause simply protects taxpayers and the state budget, but it doesn't change the nature of Medicaid expansion. What the other things that are in my bill, one of the other things is an optional work training program. It has proven to be very successful. It will only cost the state about $150,000, and it will help people get training and certification so that they can get a better job and not need Medicaid. Our budget for Medicaid for disabled people alone, for those that are fully disabled and have been on Medicaid, has increased $35 million this year. That's not the expansion population. That will be at least, as you have heard, at least $40 million for a full year of the Medicaid expansion. So, and that's a big question mark, because we do not know how many people sign up and how many people will qualify. Our neighboring states have had the experience of having 2 to 3 times more people than they predicted sign up. We don't know if our numbers are correct or not. They're not the legislature's numbers. There's a statistical company called Milliman that does that kind of evaluation and comes up with the numbers. So we have to kind of wait and see. But so having a review is another thing that's in my bill. We're going to, in 3 years, after Medicaid expansion is instituted in January of 2020, which is, we're not dragging our feet, we're not delaying anything. None of the waivers that may or may not be applied for will stop the implementation of Medicaid expansion. We can put waivers into the federal government asking for additional waivers from the federal government on Medicaid expansion. We could do that 6 months from now, we could do it tomorrow, we could do it in a year. It won't impact the program's progress through the system. But January 2020 is when it is due to be started, and we will see what the impact is on our budget as we go forward. And in 3 years, in January of 2023, my bill says that the legislature will issue a formal review. And we'll see, how is this impacting? How is it helping? Is this something that is good for our state? But it doesn't stop the program, it just reviews the program at that point. So those are enhancements and protections for the program without changing it, because I promised the people in my district that I would go with the way that they voted. And I think that that's important for all of us. Thank you.
Well, I've been around for quite a few years now, so you know how passionate I can get, loud, obnoxious, arrogant. I'm going to try and keep calm here. There are so many concerns. We are talking about these sideboards. If the federal government starts giving us less than 90% of the program, then it'll go away. But unfortunately, the CAP fund and the indigent fund will have already gone away. So if that's the case, Medicaid is not going away because there'll be no other option. Remember that this expansion covers the working poor. So the idea that we're going to demand some kind of work, 30 hours a week, whatever that number would be, or education, or voluntary work, is not infeasible. It's reasonable, among other things. But the greater concern is how the state is losing control of its own finances. Taxpayers are already concerned about property taxes continuing to go up. When we look at the fact that healthcare now has overtaken education in the billions of dollars as a part of the a little more than $8 billion we spend, including federal grants and fees and the rest of things that are collected by the state. I'm delighted that our district, District 2, recognized the dangers and did not support this expansion, because it gives me the opportunity to continue to represent not just my own personal concerns, but those of our constituents. This is going to be a disaster, and I don't see any way of stopping it, although we'll try to put the sideboards on it. This is going to hurt. This is going to take money from education. There's no question in my mind that the expansion in terms of salaries and the rest of it that education is looking for, the money's not going to be there. And if we have any kind of a downturn economically, we have additional problems, which is pretty obvious. I don't need to go through. I don't even think that I'm going to support a vote on Medicaid expansion with the sideboards. But I will work with the caucus and those that are trying to address this to get as many protections for the state and for the taxpayers as possible. But I think we have already slipped down the slope. Thank you.
also in District 2, and I want to thank the voters of District 2 for recognizing the dangers. District 2 had the least support for Medicaid expansion of any district in the state.
It's because we're the best district.
But there's been a lot of things mentioned. I'm just going to mention a couple more. And that is that when they were promoting this on the ballot, they said it would affect 62,000 people in Idaho. That number is already 91,000 by the estimates that we're getting, possibly as high as 110,000. And roughly 20,000 of those people that will be on Medicaid expansion are people who are eligible and buying their own insurance on the insurance exchange. And so we're taking people who were buying their own insurance, and they will no longer be eligible to buy their own insurance. They will have to, if they want insurance, be part of Medicaid expansion. So there's more, there's more that just keeps coming. And I want to address, I think it was Representative Mendive mentioned that we get more back, and so we're getting our own money back. In fact, in my opinion, this 90% share that the federal government pays, which will be $500 million maybe, is a year, is all borrowed money. So when we in effect are asking our children and our grandchildren to pay for health insurance for people now. And I have a real problem with that. I'm thankful that I represent a district that understands those dangers. I am working, because I believe it's going to pass, I'm working on the sideboards, but I am not going to support the funding for Medicaid expansion when it comes through, because it's the tip of the iceberg, whatever you want to call it, and for all the reasons that have been mentioned before. Thank you.
Wow, I could have started this topic at the beginning of the session and I'd still be talking. So let me try to make it as brief as possible. First of all, one of the terms that I've come to loathe when I open my email these days is obey the will of the people. I don't quite know how to respond to those people anymore, so I've stopped. The will of the people, that can be a dangerous thing. That's what, when we have democracies, the will of the people gets to decide what we do. When we have a constitutional republic, everybody's going to be taken into consideration, and we have a duty to protect everybody in the state. So the short version is, and I'll go in a minute, I'll go through some of what happened this week. The short version is, the will of the people has laid before us some language and said, do this thing. And it's very short and concise, but includes no funding. So going forward, I've decided I'm going to give in to the will of the people. And unless a bill comes before me that's taken the language of that referendum and put it into a bill with no additions, including funding, my vote will be no. Now, as far as that goes, and the thing that I've been under most fire for this week from the will of the people camp, I, together with probably one of the bravest state reps I've yet met, Julianne Young, who's the mother of 10 children, and I co-sponsored 2 bills that were presented as RSs this week. Matter of fact, we did them Friday morning. One was a repeal of the Medicaid expansion bill. The other was a sunset of the Medicaid expansion bill. So the first one, Julianne presented, and she had great reasons why we should not move forward with this referendum. The voters have dug a big hole, and we don't know how deep it is, we don't know what's at the bottom, and they've told the legislature to jump in. And it would be irresponsible, imprudent for us to do so. And so I'm not going to jump in. But I thought, well, maybe at least if we have a parachute so that we can break our fall as we're hurtling through space down to the bottom of this hole, however deep it may be. And so the next bill that I presented was a sunset bill, which would basically give us 30 months to say, okay, are the savings that the proponents of this legislation have told us going to be actually realized? And if they're not, it's over. We're out, and we won't ever look at this issue again. And of course, neither of those bills passed through the RS hearing to get a bill number, so they are, for all practical purposes, dead. So I think probably the greater issue to keep in mind is And I've received a lot of flack from people who accuse me of calling Idahoans stupid. I never said anybody was stupid. I did say that many Idahoans were not informed. I think Senator Souza addressed this. She, in fact, was very diligent in trying to explain to her constituents what the risks of this legislation were, as were a lot of us that spoke on this issue. The problem is that people didn't listen because this was an emotional issue. Now, if we talk about the proper role of government, the proper role of government is to protect and first and foremost, to protect the life and liberty of its citizens. And we can't do that without money. So does that mean that those that don't have money, we just take from others to give it to them? That's socialism. Who wants to be a socialist state? Anybody? One person. I wonder if one of you is the one I spoke to this past weekend. Not me, I won't go there. And I know that the vast majority of Idahoans are the same way. So now we're talking about, and Senator Vick touched on this, we're talking about giving health insurance to people that already can pay for health insurance in one form or another. We're also talking about providing health insurance for able-bodied people who may have just graduated from college, and we're going to give them free insurance. But you know what? There are people in Idaho that with mental and physical disabilities that don't get Medicaid benefits and have nowhere else to turn. But we're going to take money that could be used to help them, which I think is a proper role of government, to support those people, to help them at least exist, so they don't become even a greater burden on society. And in charity, I think we have a duty to do that. And we're going to give it to people that could go to work and get a job. I went to college, paid for it myself. I didn't have health insurance. If I wanted health insurance, I would have worked harder and gotten health insurance. I didn't expect anybody to give it to me for free, and I don't want to give it to anybody else.
Yeah. Amen.
And the last point I want to make, and many of you have heard me speak about my two favorite subjects, which are taxation and sound money. And Senator Vick brought up a great point, and I want to just expand on that a little bit further. The perception is that we're borrowing all this money we spend. In reality, there is no federal money that comes back to Idaho. The federal government is taking money from all your paychecks illegally, and I'm proposing legislation to stop that. We'll see if we get a hearing on that. They're taking it illegally, they're taking it to Washington, and that disappears from the money system. And then we don't borrow the money back. They don't borrow it into existence. They create it out of nothing. Put it into the money supply and pretend to send it back to the states that they've been stealing from all along. So we have this ever-increasing federal debt, national debt, that was never intended to be repaid, and it's mathematically impossible to repay it. And every quote-unquote dollar that we add to that debt is going to be a huge burden on our children and grandchildren. And this type of program, the Medicaid expansion, is exactly what's contributing to that. And it's suicide, financial suicide, for us to keep promoting that and not try to put a stop to it. So, thank you.
I have to give a slightly nuanced answer to this question because I'm unfortunately, in this particular case, the only member of the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee from Kootenai County. And Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee is the budget setting committee for the legislature, and our responsibility is to fund state law. And I can tell you, if you ask every one of these representatives and senators, one thing they really don't like, JFAC is what we call it for short, JFAC setting policy for the state. And so they get really annoyed if we try to fund things that aren't in state law or play games with that. And so I have to present it. Currently, state law, Medicaid expansion is state law. The governor signed it into law earlier in the year. The Medicaid budget is coming before Joint Finance on Wednesday. And so we plan to find the money from the state budget to fund current Medicaid expansion as it exists in state law. And in that instance, I will be voting for it because that's our responsibility to follow the state law in the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee. However, that doesn't mean that I'm not looking forward to enhanced bills like Senator Souza mentioned, that I do think there are some improvements that could be made. But I just wanted to clarify, so if you hear things on Wednesday that the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee funded Medicaid expansion, that's our responsibility. to do that. But that's not to say that there aren't going to be future bills. And so if there were changes to the Medicaid expansion provisions in statute, we call those trailer bills. And so we would essentially defund it the way that we had done initially, and then we would reappropriate funds through joint finance and appropriations at a later date if another law were to come through the legislative body to somehow alter Medicaid expansion. And so I certainly like many of the provisions of Senator Souza's legislation. It's really difficult. People are always like, well, what are you going to do on this particular bill? And I said, we don't know what that bill looks like. I can't live in hypotheticals. And so I'm interested to see what will come out of either the Senate or the House Health and Welfare Committees, and we can certainly have a vigorous debate on that. But I did want to key you into that Wednesday vote that's coming before the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee. But it's our responsibility and expectation that we fund current state laws.